Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Hurford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We're standing up, which is neat, I guess, but we're back here on this Consummate Athlete Podcast.
Yeah, so if you previously watched on YouTube, sorry, we are off of the YouTube for now. I mean, you can still get the episodes on YouTube, but we've just decided to take a bit of a break from recording it. No one needs to see our hair on Monday mornings is really where we're at.
Molly's wearing a jumpsuit that I wouldn't, it's a sexy one. It's good. It's good.
A little racy. So. Well, actually, I was just at Pilates. So in terms of my ankle recovery and sort of coming back to sport, things are going good. I decided to take this last month and do sort of some different stuff. So there's a yoga studio over by us in Collingwood, Cedar and Sage, not sponsored. I've been going to a few times now, and they have a great Pilates class. Doing a little bit of hot yoga, recognizing that I actually hate hot yoga, not doing hot yoga anymore. So it's been fun, just kind of experimenting a little bit. And I said it on a post. I've been back on the bike, and honestly, I think the interesting thing with my ankle is having to be so much more body aware in the last few weeks. Just everything you're thinking about more and more, which I mean, Pilates and yoga and stuff helps with, but I think it's actually been good for me. I'm really noticing little things and, how I'm standing and are my feet straight and, what's going on here and just paying a bit more attention, which is nice.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's, I guess, what Pilates is all about. So you're in the right place.
Yeah, exactly. And big week for me here. I guess by the time this episode goes live, I'll be down in Toronto. I'm doing a run talk, or rather my author, Misha Powell, is doing a run talk that I'm sort of facilitating, emceeing, however, talking about her book, Sprinting Through Setbacks, which we have through Strong Girl Publishing. And then I will also be hopefully pouring myself a glass of champagne or something at some point to celebrate that my new book, Running as Fast as We Can, actually is also out tomorrow. So sort of a wacky day doing a book talk with one of my authors, having my book come out.
Okay, so now if someone was a Shred Girls fan or parent of a Shred Girls fan, what ages are we targeting here? Is it a step up? I assume the kids who were the Shred Girls fans have also become older, but who are we targeting with this?
Yeah, I think I talked about this last year when we were at the NICA regional race, and I had young women now coming up to me saying that they read Shred Girls when they were little, which is frightening.
They're now getting their doctorate. Yeah, frightening for me age-wise, but really, really cool to hear. So Running as Fast as We Can is my first young adult novel, so very much more geared towards teenagers, young women. It's very high school. There are, more social issues in it than, the Shred Girls, which are really just about friendship and fun on bikes and a little bit of life lessons. But this one is definitely, it gets a little bit deeper for sure. It's a bit more nuanced. I'm super, super, super proud of it. So you wouldn't read this one to your toddler, maybe?
No, this is not one for 5-year-olds.
I mean, I don't know what you read to your toddler, but...
I mean, a lot of people have read Shred Girls.
So start there. If you haven't, that's the logical start if you have younger kids.
Yeah. But anyway, Running as Fast as We Can. And then again, Misha's book, Sprinting Through Setbacks. You can find them and all the Shred Girl stuff, more fun stuff over at stronggirlpublishing.com. So yeah, very exciting. It's weird. This is my 11th book. And it's one of the things where I have to keep reminding myself that no, each book is super exciting and, you should be celebrating this.
You like to move on to the next thing.
I do. So yeah, it occurred to me last night. I was like, oh, shoot, I haven't actually posted about the fact that I have a book coming out. So yeah, to get back to that. Anyway, What's new with you, Peter?
Well, we're getting to this cyclocross season, so a little bit of coaching cyclocross. I just did a coaching course with Ontario Cycling, or not I guess not a coaching course. It's for young kids. What am I looking for? A clinic, a camp. But that was mountain biking, and we had a great day for it, which was amazing. And we had equal women and men coaches, which is great, which is really cool to see. I don't think I've ever been on a camp that's been the case, really. Especially this is more of a high performance camp.
camp. So really, really neat to have that. And then what else are we doing? I guess I'm potentially going to lead coaching courses this weekend, but we'll keep that under wraps.
Yeah, we'll talk about it after the fact.
Stuff can change.
It's true. But, Air Canada's not on strike anymore, so I think you're going.
Could be.
Yeah, and all of this running around, all this stuff would not be possible without keeping our immune systems up and in fighting form. And a big part of that for us is actually AG1. So this is your kind of all-around supplement, your vitamins, your minerals, your adaptogens, your greens, probiotics, prebiotics, all in one. Actually, a very tasty mix. It is the way I start every morning.
That's right. And they've been a supporter of the podcast for quite a while now. I don't know how long. We don't have the count. Maybe we find that for next time. But
I think it's been over 3 years.
We like that it's got that NSF rating, that third-party sort of certification for what's in it is important with supplements for sure. And then we also I like the travel packs that, they're really slim. I always say they fit in your skinny jeans, but they're very slim.
Skinny jeans are so out of style.
They are easy. If I go away for 5 days for this weekend coaching course, I'm going to probably bring 5 of these just, flat in my suitcase, right? It fits really nicely in there.
Yeah, just a really nice kind of nutritional insurance, basically, for the times that you're maybe not eating as well as you should.
Which could be cyclocross season. It could be traveling for work. It could be, you're going to Toronto on Tuesday for this book talk, right? And maybe you're, eating at Starbucks or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Next weekend, we're actually heading to Lake Placid for the World Cup, or actually 2 weeks from now, I guess. Heading to Lake Placid for the World Cup with... Peter just spilled his coffee everywhere. Not on the dog? Okay, not on the dog.
Yeah, not on the electronics.
Just on the white rug and electronics.
Who said standing was a good idea?
Perfect. So we're heading to Lake Placid for the World Cup, so that's going to be exciting. But again, AG1 will be right along with us. And right now, you can try AG1, drinkag1.com/MollyH. You get 5 free travel packs and a year of immune-supporting vitamin D in these little oil droplets. They're actually also very tasty, kind of a cucumbery vibe. So drinkag1.com/MollyH. We'll include that link in the show notes. And as usual, so helpful to the podcast if you, head over there, check it out, and give it a try. Honestly, we love it. We think you'll love it. Yeah. So with that, today's question actually is very cyclocrossy. Actually, I think as I was looking at this question, it's interesting because I started thinking about all of the people for whom this question wouldn't necessarily be relevant for. Because we're talking about catting up, so what category to race in. And for a lot of people anymore, that actually doesn't really exist because they're doing gravel or they're doing these more mass start kind of races. So maybe their results get pulled out, but it's really just an age-based category. It's not actually choosing the category. So it really is road, cyclocross, mountain bike where this comes into play. And I'd say stuff like road, it's a bit more cut and dry when you should cat up or not. It's usually pretty obvious. Cyclocross, though, this question is one that I've had. I don't know if you had it when you probably didn't because you were racing pretty seriously on a mountain bike before you came to cross, but okay, so I'll read the question, then I'll talk about it. So in my upcoming race this weekend, I have 2 options for which category to enter. 3-4 or 1-2-3 age 35 plus. As I see it, the advantage of the 3-4 is I'll be in a better position to have a good result and work on racecraft and confidence. On the other hand, the 1-2-3 race is longer and I'll be a bit faster, so I get better training stimulus. Do you have any advice on which you recommend? So I had almost this exact same dilemma back when I was racing cross a couple of years in. I was right between the 3-4 B category, winning that or going for the win in that versus in that case jumping up to the 1-2-3 elite race. And it was a really awkward decision to make because it was for me especially it was very disparate results. It was either winning or back of the elite pack.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? It comes up. Some people, it'll never come up, right? You're sort of in the category you're in, and that could be because you've just been pro your whole life and la-di-da. And then, there's also the people who just, the category they're in is the category they're in. They're mid-pack people, and that's where you're going to end up, and that's great too. As far as your there's a few ways we want to take this question, I guess. The other ways we could do the same analysis, and these options are presented would be distance, right? People are catting up, so categorying up is what cat up means. Would be from 50 to 100 miles, or any of those distance-based things. I have a few clients that are, could go to masters like myself. And so there's always this masters versus expert or elite sort of thing as well. I don't know if that's in road again, because you are sort of doing more categories in a lot of times. So you can stay in Cat 1, but then usually as you get older, you go down to Cat 2 and Cat 3. But you could, some of these people who are just legends of our local, if not, international race series, can race into their 40s and 50s and beyond sometimes.
I mean, look, Laura Van Gilder was winning. I always mention her because she is just like such a hero of mine, like winning professional crit races well into her 50s.
So I almost view this question as like finding the right race for you. Like, we need to find you a race where it's competitive enough. And that winning, we talk about your winning being, it might be a race for 10th. It might be a race to be on the last lap. That might be enough. But what we want to be careful is situations where you're riding alone the entire race. This happens more in like a gravel or an endurance scenario. But, where there's a decent race and it's compelling to you, like, I think that's the ultimate thing is like, we want you to keep coming back. So if you're just getting drilled trying to hold on to a pro elite Cat 1 thing, whether it's a longer race or not, you're getting drilled. It's not, this question had the assumption, which I think in my response, I said, like, it is an assumption to say, like, we always want to think that longer is a better training effect, but it's not necessarily, right? Especially because this isn't like a zone 2 training effect. You're not getting, this endurance ride by doing pro. Like, pro is faster, but also often longer. Cyclocross, it's not like Matthew van der Poel is pacing himself and going slower than the masters or something, right? They're all going faster, but for more laps, right? That's why it's ridiculous. Like, these pros are just so wild. So I think that's the thing to remember. So when I'm looking at this, I usually say, like, if you're not winning, then just stay in the category you're in. If no one's saying you have to upgrade, just stay in the category you're in. But if you're winning by 6 minutes or something like that, like, those are obvious situations. And then by the same token, if you're finishing, not on the same lap or like well down, and by looking at your lap times or your average speed, if the courses are the same, then you might be able to say, like, oh, I would actually not even win the expert race. I should go down and try and win the expert race because it's going to be a great race for the top 5. So that's, I think, where I usually look at it, is like, sort of like, are you being forced up? And then if not, just stick where you are until you're winning, right? Like, or doing well, at least.
Well, I hate to ever cite it or quote it, but, there is the might as well win concept that I actually do think is a really good one in this case.
Okay. Well, expand, I guess, that you're talking about Johan Brunel. So
I was going to say, that's the Johan Brunel.
I think the 1% that we're missing was doping in this case, but where are you taking this quote?
No, just like I think a lot of people, and I'll include myself in this, like, the reason I actually did end up going up to the elites was actually less about where it was going to be the better training stimulus. And I mean, I probably would have said that at the time, but if I look back, I think a lot of it was actually fear of having to fight for the win. Like, it's a lot easier to race in the middle of the pack or like towards the back of the pack and kind of get your ass handed to you versus showing up knowing that, like, you should win this race. Or like, you should be on the podium and that you should be at the front of this race. To me, being at the front of the race, like, that's a lot more pressure internally. So I don't think it's a horrible thing that I catted up and was not like the world's best elite racer. I think it's fine. It's, gotten me to a lot of places and stuff. But I do think I went up pretty much because I was afraid of having to fight for the win in cyclocross.
Okay, so you're saying, like, maybe in hindsight you should have stayed and
I should have probably stayed a little bit longer and actually learned to win.
Yeah, because it is hard to learn to race, right? Where you're back and forth with people and following wheels and trying to find your line, and especially off-road things, but even like cornering on a wheel in road and then getting around at the right time to win. If you don't learn that in sport or expert or the lower categories, you're not going to magically come in and figure it out in elite. And then, like, it's very hard to come from the back in elite. And I would say, like, even I like remember coming out of junior and not really ever being, I was like 7th and stuff. And then I sort of went into elite because you could, like, there was sort of this points like threshold. It wasn't forced. I had the option, but I went to elite for the same reasons you're saying. Like, it's a little bit of ego. And like, of course you're going straight to pro. You're an expert. Now you're pro.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then I always wonder if I had gone to the, whatever it was, the one underneath, we'll call it Cat 2, and I actually had a bit of back and forth racing, maybe built up endurance a bit more, just strictly for racing, like the muscular endurance and the capacity there. would I have been a better elite racer, right? Because I like actually was at the front versus spending, I don't know, let's say 10 seasons just like mid-packer, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think like if you had been coaching me at the time, I think what you would have said to me is like, okay, well, like let's look at this in the next, 5, in this case, it was like the B category or the 3-4, in the next like 5 3-4 races, can you, get the whole shot? Can you, get into the corner first? Can you, like, I think we would have almost set some parameters for like not just winning, but also like executing these like race tactics, because then when I went into the pro field, I had no chance of even trying those tactics because I was so far back from like 30 seconds in.
Yeah, like you've never led a race.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I would come eventually. I won a lot of the 3-4 races. Like, don't get me wrong, but the pressure to win them was like scary. And I wasn't a great starter. I wasn't really great technically. I just had a lot of like oomph so I could keep going for longer.
It's tricky. I mean, I want to acknowledge too that, especially for women, a lot of times there's, 2 women in the
so that was the
lower category. There's 3 women in the pro category, and then the pro women are really fast, so you're getting, it's demoralizing. But then when you go back, you get called a sandbagger because you're winning by 6 minutes, and you're like, well, where do you want me to be? I'm winning by 6 minutes in this one, and then I'm losing by 6 minutes in this one.
I often talk about when I race on the track, there were 5 of us, and every week we would race, and we knew exactly how we were going to finish, and it never changed. And like that sucks.
Right. And maybe over time it would, different people have different, life phases or whatever. But I would say the only other advice I have, like, it is a little personal, but I think if it's not clear, sometimes just staying, like not making a decision is fine too, and just rolling with it. I would say the one thing I do a lot with my master's clients is like, well, now you have this choice. Let's forget about the race results as much. If it's not apparent, again, sometimes it's apparent, like you're not, you're a long ways back. So it's like obvious you shouldn't upgrade or you should upgrade. It's obvious. If it's not, I would say you have a choice. It's about the same. We don't even know, right? Like A and B, like maybe you're going to be behind and then maybe you're going to win. And in either case, people are either calling you a sandbagger or you suck or whatever, I guess. It's not clear which one's going to be better. You don't have a strong preference. Then I would look at things like the cost of the race. Like that's why I enjoy racing masters, is it's usually 10 to 40 or $50 cheaper. And then also the time of day. I know for a lot of my clients who have kids, it's like, and families, it's like, well, if I race in the earlier one, which is often the more, the less fast one, I guess the category, the lower category. If I race in that, I can race at 8 or 9 a.m. I'm home for 10 a.m. and then we have family time the rest of the day. And like family didn't even notice I was gone, basically, right? Like they just had to get through breakfast or something or sleep in, and I was home before they got up. And it's like, oh, wow. So I can race and it's like not a big deal versus, okay, I'm going to race pro and they go at 3 p.m. and I'm going to be there doing, 4 pre-ride windows. And it's like, okay, well now you've just made this into a 12-hour ordeal. So sometimes that alone is like, oh, okay, well, that's pretty obvious. Like when I actually look at the schedule, my family has made this decision for me, and that's great too, right? Then there you go. It was hard to make the decision, but you looked at some of these other factors and it like made the decision more clear. So I think sometimes we look only at the position and the points and these things, but if you have the choice and it's not clear, then I would look at price, time of day, convenience, and see if any of those help make the decision a little clearer.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny, as you said that, I had written down schedule ? Because I think a lot of the time we don't think about that in the moment. We're just like so jazzed that we can go to the next category, or like, we're thinking about the actual race and kind of forgetting that, like, yeah, most of us have lives. And I mean, if you've ever had to drive home after the pro men's race from a cyclocross race on a weekend, you know how much that sucks.
Well, and I felt bad. I was saying this to Sid, who I coach, who has kids and everything else, and he's younger, and so he's racing elite. But he was sitting beside me, and I was talking to someone and saying this. I love racing in the Masters because it's like 8 or 9 a.m. and then I'm done at 10:15. I have a chocolate milk, and then you and I like we go and get like burgers and a beer, and we sit around, and then we watch like the the elite races, and it's great. And then Sid was like, "You're really selling me on this elite stuff, right?" So I felt bad about that, but it's really like it is. It makes for a great day. Like at Nationals, I got to race And then I actually hung out with friends and we did some volunteering and I had some chocolate milk or something. And then we actually went and did a run later in the day because we had to stay till like 8 p.m. for the awards, which was a whole other story. But, we actually got to go and do more adventures across the day while we were also watching the elite races. Like it was just such a full and amazing day. And when I look at like my values of why I exercise and why I move and go to these races and stuff, I'm like, so I could have sat in a hotel room and waited for the elite race. And then, maybe I could have pulled whatever, top 10, maybe, who knows? Or I could have like raced masters, which essentially was, it's a hard effort, same course. It was great. And then have this other full day where like I'm actually connecting with people, seeing friends I hadn't seen in a long time. Also got to run. I was preparing for Leadville. I know it seems excessive, so I hesitate to tell that story, but I was sort of getting ready for this long run. So I was trying to stack those in the weeks before. And my friends were runners. So I was like, wow, we have till, I've literally recovered for 6 hours after this race. So let's go for a run. And we watched the race while we were doing that too. So it all sort of embedded in nice. But what I'm saying is like, that to me makes, even though my brain periodically is like, oh, maybe you could have been, top 10 maybe in this, I always shut it down because it's like, well, it opens up so many other options, and just sort of really is a fulfilling pursuit when I go to it. Right. So.
Yeah, for sure. Now on that note, I mean, I guess the problem with, I was about to be like, you could always try racing up. The problem is in a lot of race situations, like you don't really have the option of like, once you cat up, it's hard to cat back down. So there's definitely like a bit of caution there. Like you need to be pretty certain that you want to do, you can always like backtrack. It's not like, everything you can figure out, but it's going to be hard once you're up to drop it back down.
I think it's just some paperwork probably that to get, the adjustment, but it is, you're going to have to go through a bunch of bureaucracy. I've sent, emails one way or the other for people in the past with our provincial organization. It's not, so hectic. And, usually what happens is if like you're appealing something, there needs to be like a committee decision. So, if you do have a coach who is connected, then they can usually like voice, I'm very sure that Molly's going to do well. Can we get the upgrade early? Sometimes that works. And then on the flip side, you can say, oh, this athlete thought they could upgrade, but like obviously the field is like 2 elite women who are very fast, like world class. Like I think probably would make more sense, like, ask for forgiveness. And usually they're not going to make someone just, go to that category and but it is going to be a process to do it. So you do want to look at some of the maths beforehand, right? In the same way we mathed out your Leadville finish time or pacing. We can do that with, the average speed or the lap time, or now with Strava, you can pull like segments out of the course because sometimes the course isn't the same. But to your thing about the first corner, like, can you do this climb? How much time are you losing in one climb, right? And it's like, well, if you're dropping a minute in a climb or 30 seconds in a shorter climb, I just don't know. Like you can predict how that's going to go, right?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so I think that, hopefully helps a little bit, or has probably just muddled the field here, muddled the decision even more, but just some different food for thought. And the thing we talked about at the beginning of this is also the distance. And this is, much more applicable to a lot of people who are racing gravel, who are doing more endurance mountain bike or marathon mountain bike.
Yeah, so do you go to the longer distance? Are you ready? And we need a term for this, though, like cat up. So it's like mile up. Mileage up, mile up. Anyway, okay, well, submit your best ChatGPT variation on that. So we're going to go with that. Yeah, like when do you go from 50 to 100? And I think that's something that, since we're entering these races as one-offs usually, it's not typically a series, you're not committed to like, 100 milers for the rest of your life. I think what's underused is honestly entering some of the shorter ones. Sometimes, if you're busy and you want to go participate, you want to practice going really hard or harder for a different period of time. Again, time of day, like you want to be wrapped up and home at a different time, or you want to start later. The shorter race often starts an hour or 2 hours later, and you don't have to start at 5 a.m. or something, like the longer one. So again, something where you might look at that time. Maybe you're supporting a spouse. I have a lot of clients like that where maybe their spouse is also racing, and so they do the shorter one that race, and maybe they trade back and forth or something too. That would be a solution there. But what do you think? When is someone ready even in running, right? When are they ready to go from 50K to 50 miles and from 50 miles to 100Ks? And
well, it's funny because it's not quite the same as like winning the races.
Probably
in the
not.
Lower category.
Most of these races are not.
But I think there's a similar level of competency that you should have. So, it's not like I jumped into hundreds like right off the bat, right? Like I had done a lot of marathons, and then I did a 50K. And then, from there, I actually stayed at 50K for a while, and then eventually went to 50 miles, and then did 100K before I did 100 miles. So I think in gravel, it's really easy to skip the progression because it is just kind of like, the default race is usually the longer race. But, to me, the reality is like, I'd rather do the short race and race it well, make sure that I have like my fueling and my pacing and all that kind of stuff really sorted out. And then after I feel really confident in that distance, like that distance is very easy to do, not easy to do, but like is very possible. And like, I'm competent at doing it at race pace. I think race pace is kind of the key here. Is it's going to look different for everyone. I'm not saying that you're racing to win. But when you can actually do the, let's say, 50-mile gravel race, when you can do that and feel like you're actually racing it the entire time, not just trying to survive it, then I think, you can think about going longer. But if you're struggling just to get through the 50-miler, I don't think it really makes a ton of sense to go up in distance. If you feel like every time you do one of the shorter ones, you're struggling at the end or like bonking at the end, or you were with the main pack and then you fell off about like 2/3 of the way through, or with a pack and fell off 2/3 of the way through. I think that's a sign that you should stay at the shorter distances and get more proficient, again, finishing them feeling like you were able to push the pace the entire time.
Sure. Yeah, I guess it does depend a little bit on the goal of it all. You can get into packs, right? And this is where we have the mass starts too. So the gender doesn't matter as much. You just have everyone in there racing. So you can get a pretty good race usually and ride with people. So I do like to see that people are able to get into, get onto wheels and stuff like that a little bit and get a little bit of tactics wherever that is in the race. Again, not everyone's going to win the race outright, but you might, what is winning for you is a good question. I think for the folks who are trying to finish, you see a lot more of that way you want to finish it. I think there's some obvious math there. Like if it's the cutoff time is 12 hours and you do, 6 hours, for this shorter race. And so then, it's going to be very hard for you to get to 12 hours. I'm using rough math here, obviously, but if you double it, are you going to get through the race? And if you can't do the half distance one, say at that pace, or you can't do whatever the distance is at around that race speed, or ideally better because it is shorter, then that would be one that like you need to keep building your endurance and your capacity in the shorter distances, right? You don't have the speed to finish it in the goal time. Now, a lot of people also have like, I don't actually want to be chasing the cutoff. I want to be finishing in, under whatever. So then again, you could do that math of like, can you do X distance in the appropriate amount of time or at the appropriate speed? So those would be maths that you could do to try and predict, right? Because that's what we're trying to do, is forecast what's going to happen when you make this choice, right? You enter the race, you cat up, you cat down. What is the likely scenario, right? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know a lot of times, right? You mentioned running too. Like running, a lot of times there does have to be a bigger build-up. There's some people who just walk in and do their first 100-miler as their first race ever, right? But a lot of times there's a story on the back end where they never run again, or they're injured, just niggling injuries forever would be like, a case where you wouldn't really notice that it affected them, but it's like, oh, that person was never right again.
Or it sounds like they just came in out of nowhere, but then you look and you're like, oh, actually, they were an Olympic marathoner.
Yeah, and that's where the speed thing, right? I think, we see this often in both disciplines where, the people that win the short track mountain bike race can probably win a marathon race, right? Like, would you bet on a Nino or a Tom Pitcock? Like they obviously have speed. They can sprint really quickly, but then across the duration. So that is where working on speed with interval training and all this other stuff does then extrapolate out, right? Like the curve, I always say, like, in simple terms that aren't math, like if you think about a line and you move the one end of the line up, it sort of helps the rest of the line. And that's what, like the same as the power curve, right? Not that you don't have to train the long distance endurance stuff. Obviously that's important, but that is something that we see, right? Where someone's like the classic endurance athlete where it's all flat and they have one speed. And so that's the tricky thing sometimes when we go between all these distances and durations.
Okay, well, hopefully that was enough food for thought that someone can maybe make a slightly more informed decision. And again, no wrong answers. Like if you desperately want to try the long distance or see what it's like racing in the elite field or the 1, 2, 3 field, like by all means, try it. Like this is not
this is just bikes.
Especially in bike racing. Yeah, I guess that's, the running, there's a little more like you're just going to break down and not be able to walk at some point, and then you'll drop out. In biking, yeah, there is a little bit more where you could enter a 100-miler and it might just be an adventure of a day, and you might have to drop out. And as long as you're okay and it's not going to be like you're never going to ride again if you have to shorten your route or ask for a ride back, then get in and see. And then, that's a goal for next year. Last year I made it to 70 miles. This year I'm going to try and get the whole thing, right? And sometimes that's the best option. The step between, especially if it's 50K to 100K or 50 miles to 100 miles, like those are big jumps, right? It's not just 10% more. These are big jumps. So sometimes you have to almost invent your own challenge and see how it goes. And honestly, a lot of times in cycling, people will get through, right? Like it's...
And if you do decide to go up to elite and you're soliciting sponsors, you know what you should use in order to obtain money from the sponsors.
Well, I was going to say the sponsorship guide for athletes book, but you're probably talking about the payable add-on for Google Forms.
That I am. Although actually the athletes guide for sponsorship also available at stronggirlpublishing.com. But actually, it's funny. I feel like that book's actually having like a weird resurgence. I've heard from a lot of people
who are... What do they call these athletes? Privateers.
Privateers, yeah. It's definitely... People are reading it again, and it's very...
It's on Amazon too.
It's on everything,
okay, there you go. But yeah, our friends and sponsors of the show here, Payable. And we use this form for a lot of things. We're getting ready to get our club membership open. So this is... You join our club for $60, I think is the price. Our local mountain bike club. And this is what we're using instead of some of these other softwares to save a lot of money. I think this year we put maybe $4,000 we saved by using this versus some of these other big names. And it works great. And it's, now we have a nice spreadsheet that's simple and we don't have to export it from any other clunky thing. There's not another logon. So just a great thing for clubs and weekly races.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard us talk about it before, it is an add-on for Google Forms. So if you know how to use a Google Form already, then boom, in like 3 minutes, you can be up and running and taking money with your payable form. And actually, I'll be using it tomorrow. I'm down in Toronto doing book sales at an event. Mm-hmm. And actually, that's how I do the in-person sales. Because we don't do them very often, it doesn't really make sense for me to have a really expensive like Square reader and this, that, and the other thing. So instead, we just have this easy form that people can scan a QR code that I have like sitting out, and it takes them to the form and they fill it out. They get their receipt sent to them. They can show me on their phone that they've paid for the book, and boom, have their book, walk away. It's a, just super simple way to do this, especially if you are someone who isn't really doing like constant in-person sales or, doesn't have like the need to have any kind of subscription like on a monthly basis or anything like that. Or you're an organization that just wants to actually save money. Definitely check it out. It's at payableapps.com. That's PAYABLEAPPS.com. And you can get actually a bunch of free Google Form templates, including one for sponsorship, one for club membership. We actually help them put together a lot of the templates. So it is very bike racer centric, I think.
Jersey orders.
Yeah. It's what we've used for jersey orders. So definitely check it out if you are trying to, collect money for pretty much anything. Okay. Last question. Adventuring versus racing. To train, to not train, to never race again. So this is from a master's athlete, so like an older athlete, who was kind of just like in this debate over whether adventuring or racing, made sense at a certain point.
For sure. And this is, into the 70s, right? And more we have clients that are late 60s, even getting into 70s who are racing. But this is their back and forth every year, I find, which I completely understand, right?
Well, you're in it too.
I'm in it, but I understand at that age too. You are getting into a risk reward. Life is, you have lots of things you want to do, right? And it's, there's only so much time and energy is the reality, right? So they sort of, and even at 40, as you say, I can feel like the energy for it all, for the training and the going to the races. It's tough.
Well, and there's a point where you also kind of start, I think, especially if you've been racing a long time, you start kind of having a bit of that, like, is the payoff of like another, medal, or especially when you are in the older categories and there aren't that many people in your category, is the payoff of like that race going to be as fulfilling as doing, something like the, say, no winter maintenance loop, 2-day bike packing trip. And I think I guess the key there is like both of those things, they're both cool in their own way.
And they also both require like work and training. So I think our answer, like before we get too far into it, is just like either one works as long as it's giving you a goal that you can kind of like actively pursue, that's keeping you, moving on a more daily, weekly basis, not just, oh, I'm giving up racing, so now I'm like hanging up the bike, or like I'm only riding like once every couple weeks and, for 20 minutes or whatever. It's kind of whatever is going to keep you the most motivated to keep training and pushing.
Mm-hmm. And some people definitely need that thing they're getting ready for to keep training. And we do believe that it's important to train, right? Whatever that means for you, we're very open to that being, switching to the gym or switching to paddleboarding and some other stuff, right? There's lots of ways to get movement, and it doesn't all have to be extreme cycling training either, right? We can let go of that. But for those who are in love with cycling, which these folks are, it is that back and forth with racing. And so what I try and encourage is, it's not, you're never going to race again. You could enter an event, and it might not be something that you really are super competitive about, but it might be something like the QSE stage race where, it's more like a tour you're going on. And maybe once you get into it, there'll be a little bit of back and forth and a little bit of competition, but mostly you're there for the trails and the tour and the hanging out afterwards. The community is a big piece. So I think we don't shut the door, but yeah, you're sort of opening yourself up to like what you're getting ready for, ranging from bike packing to the local club event, to a race, to whatever. I know a few of these clients have really started loving enduro. And again, it's not that they're doing backflips in the enduro, but they're good mountain bikers, and they mostly take their time, but they're speedy. And it's mostly just because it's a big ride with people, and there's food afterwards, and it gets them out, right? And some of them are really into the trail building. So then they're like actually helping volunteering on the front end if it's a local thing. So yeah, there's sort of those aspects of the community and the volunteering that are the why behind their events. And yeah, it sort of ties into their weekly activity because it says, oh, in June, I'm going to do this thing and I need to be ready. So I'm going to go out and ride a couple times a week, right?
I love that. I also really like the metaphor of like, instead of thinking about it as shutting the door, think about it as like, you're actually just opening up a couple more windows. You're not really like closing anything. You're actually just opening everything up. And I think that takes the pressure off of it, because I think too often, like, we do want to live in these binaries of like, I'm racing or I'm not racing. I'm like, I am this or I am this. But obviously, as I talk about often, we contain multitudes. You're allowed to race a couple times a season, but not have it be, the thing that you did. You maybe you used to race 20 times a season, and now you race like 2 or 3, and you do a couple of big trips with friends, and like that's actually like, the better balance that you prefer now. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you do need like a season off. So you're not actually like taking and, doing more of like, trips with friends or just a couple like local things that you're psyched on. And you need the break from signing up for races. And that is also totally okay. Again, we still think, you can be training for life, training for adventure. Like we kind of stand by the keep moving, but it's totally fine to take a year where you're not signing up.
And it's interesting, if you haven't read the Joe Friel Fast After 50 book, it is one that gets mentioned a lot. And I do think, as with most things, Joe Friel, it's pretty spot on, right? Like his books tend to stand up quite well. And they go in a bit into sort of nutritional changes, and it goes into like the importance of strength training. And this was well before everyone was yelling, lift heavy, SHIT.
Oh my God, I can't believe you just spelled shit.
It's not like we swear on this podcast.
Is that even swearing anymore? I feel like that doesn't even...
I don't know.
I don't think that rates.
So the nutrition, the strength training, the high intensity, he was saying like it's still, we need to do these intervals and motivate them somehow. And so some folks, I would say I'm like this, where I so far am pretty motivated to go out and do my hills. I can deal with a fair bit of monotony, and I still do it, but I can also sense that like, as much as I used to be able to go to the local hill and do it, I still like, probably one of my sessions each week is a little more like I'm going on a route and I'm going to hit these 4 hills, and I try and, match it so the recoveries aren't too long, and it is still like effective interval training, but it's not the, 4x4 with like exactly 2 minutes of recovery, really like on the same hill, but I try and do that once a week. But in any case, Joe Friel's book was very, very good. And I know one of the concepts, which I always find hard, but I think maybe applies to this like seasonal thing. He talked about the week for a master's, as we get over 50 and 60 and into our 70s, that maybe it takes 8 or 9 days to do a 7-week. What we used to do in a week would take maybe an extra day or 2. And I always thought, well, are you sort of just saying that we take an extra rest day in the week? and why do we have to make the week, like the week sort of, I know it's arbitrary that we choose 7 days, but I'm like, this is hard on my brain.
I think it's because he didn't want to say you have to take 2 rest days a week.
Right. Okay. People hate that. Yeah.
So the week is just longer.
Yeah. So you do a 9-day cycle. And so his argument was that as we get into our 60s and certainly 70s, most of us aren't, we're more flexible. That's the nice thing as we get older.
So the 9-day week is actually easier to do when you're retired and you're not
Mondays don't matter as much, maybe, or even better than Sundays, right? I have a lot of clients that are doing community things. They're going to church. That's when the grandkids are available. So again, we have to keep these roles and goals of our life in mind. And as you get into those ages, usually the family, the community is becoming more important. So biking, racing on a Sunday, it doesn't always work. But where I was going with that, beyond that concept, which take it or leave it, go read the book, was that maybe that same thing applies to our season, where we used to do, say, 10 races in a season, but now maybe we spread those 10 races over even 2 seasons, 2 years even, maybe, right? Because season could be, cyclocross season and whatever your summer season is, mountain bike. But maybe even over the year, it's like 5 races a year. So we're actually reducing the weekends. Maybe you pick and choose your absolute favorites, the ones that are easy to, ones that coincide with some travel you want to do, and then you just sprinkle them in. And again, we can be flexible on what an event or a competition or a thing that you're training for looks like. But I think that's the other thing I would say, is that like the frequency of these big events probably decreases, and that makes it much more tolerable and leaves space again for the group ride and stuff that you want to do that's close to home and easier.
Well, it's funny. I think what we've seen since 2020, when obviously like all the events got canceled, is I think it made a lot of people at all ages a lot more specific about the races that they wanted to do. And I'd say a lot of the people that you work with don't try to fit as many races into their schedule as they maybe did 5 years ago. And I think it's because we all realize like having some weekends where we are home to do things with friends and go on adventures with friends actually like is as important to us as the racing element. And I actually think that's great for like as we're getting older, like perspective. I mean, it's keeping with our 4 C's of like having that community in there, and like, we're super guilty of this. Like, it's very easy for us to disappear with racing for months and then not have seen our good friends who live here for a good chunk of the year. And I think we've gotten way better about like making sure we're spending that time.
Mm-hmm. And maybe something, off the bat with this question, it is not just for the 70-year-old athletes that we're thinking. I think the at some point there's a question. It comes at different points for all of us, right? I have clients who are in their teens, they're going away to school, and this is a transition in life. I have clients who are leaving university, going to the workplace, and now they're thinking about family and marriage, and work is really hectic when you start working for the first time and you have school debt, right? And well, how do you fit biking into that transition? I don't know. Some people do it, but a lot of people don't, right? A lot of people stop and then come back, and that's okay. But again, these principles of maybe we just race half as little, and what racing means to you might evolve to like the local group race or club event or whatever, right? Like the bike packing, ride home from school or something like that. There's lots of ways you can use this and still be involved, right? And I think that's what we're sort of advocating for, is trying to keep cycling, if not, endurance sport and training in there for your health and your wellness and your community. And then again, it can evolve year to year as your life does, or as you get past these different transitions in life, right? Retirement would be the other obvious one, right? Like a lot of people do a bunch of stuff as they retire, traveling and enjoying that first year of retirement. That's like really joyous. And they say you have to figure out what you're doing after that first few months. But yeah, that's the idea, right? Is that you might have to take a break or choose to take a break for a little while there, or just, deload a little bit during those periods. And I think that's really smart. But I think those principles definitely apply at those transition stages of life.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Love it. And of course, if you want to talk through how to train for your adventure or race or your, schedule that combines them both, definitely head over to consummateathlete.com. We have phone consults, custom 3-month plans. Those are actually perfect for someone who has kind of a little bit of variety and like weird scheduling going on.
And how am I going to fit my group ride in with everything else, and strength training? Like I want to do it, but I can't fit it in. And what's a routine? So it does answer those. And I would say our first question today is another one. I do a lot of like, what happened, help me forecast what happens if I upgrade. That's where this question came from, with someone who emailed and asked, right? So it's sort of, it's a common question. So we can certainly look at what you have for results and what your races are going to look like as well.
So keep those questions coming in. Again, consummateathlete.com. We have a contact form on there, so you can send all of your questions. Hit us up on Instagram at consummateathlete. And if you have not yet done so, do us a huge favor, rate, review, subscribe, all that stuff. Super, super important. We're, really putting a lot of effort into the podcast in coming months. We have a lot of big stuff coming along, a lot of changes on our website, all that. And yeah, the reviews and ratings are super, super appreciated. And with that, have a great week of training, and we will see you next Tuesday. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.